So my name is Celia Lacayo, and I am coming here from LA Social Science. I am the Associate Director of Community Engagement, and I also teach in the Chicano Studies, Central American Studies, and African American Studies Department. Today we have a real treat with us. We have Professor Otto Santa Ana from the Chicano Studies, Central American Studies Department, a senior scholar and very distinguished in his expertise. And so we first want to say hello, Otto. It is such a pleasure to have you on as a dear colleague today. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. It's really a joy to be working with you again, Celia.
So Otto, in your first seminal book, you really take into account how media narratives of Latinos affect stereotypes and even politics. Can you walk us through that a little bit and tell us why that's so important?
What I found out, going all the way back, what I realized one day was that I had gotten married and I had just bought the LA Times. I'd come from Albuquerque, met my wife. We moved to Los Angeles, but we were newlyweds. And so I had a subscription to the LA Times. This was during the time of Prop 187 in the mid 90s, 94. And well, I didn't read the paper for weeks. Meanwhile, the discussions of what was going on was attacks on immigrants, quite severe, as severe as they were in 2008, very violent discussions. And I thought, well, when I started reading the LA Times, I realized, my God, the Times is not a liberal paper. It's a very conservative paper. I was surprised because I had just moved here. And then I realized, well, let me do something about it, because I had a whole stack of 6 weeks of paper and did a content analysis of it. What I didn't find in the traditional analysis was anything that indicated the virulence, the hatred that was being spoken, or who was speaking it. And so I went through again the whole material, and I realized it was in the metaphors that were being used. The language of imagery was very negative. And it was used by both the LA Times editorial side and the people who were anti-immigrant. What that was astonishing to me, because at this point in time, content analysis did not have that. People did not pay attention to metaphor. And yet I had done the work in cognitive science to know that metaphor was very, very important to express people's understanding, to guide people's thinking about the world. And so I went back and did a whole new analysis with a whole new set of highlighters, and realized that the metaphors that were being used to characterize immigrants at the time in 1994 were ugly, racist. Immigrants are animals was the primary. 33% of all the metaphors were immigrants are animals. The other ones were immigrants are vermin, immigrants are dangers, immigrants are all sorts of characterizations that were very, very violent. Now, I went back and did a far more thorough study of 4 years with students who then I could control who was the interpretations. And in fact, I found the very same metaphors with stronger figures, stronger numbers. And that was the basis of me beginning to look at content analysis, the study of how people imagine their world through the language that's being spoken. It is through what we call conceptual metaphors. The imagery, when we talk about an immigrant as an animal, as an immigrant as a felon, and when we talk about demonstrators as thugs, we have this is the ideas that are translated directly to the audience's perspective. So as social scientists, what we do is we went and I empirically looked through 2 years of well, there were three referenda in the 90s. One against immigrants, that's Prop 187. One against affirmative action, that was Prop 209. And one against bilingual education, and that was Prop 227. That was 6 and 7 years of metaphor analysis of the LA Times, bolstered by looking at a national study of newspapers. And what we found was that the metaphors were very, very consistently used. We found that liberal papers and conservative papers were using exactly the same kinds of metaphors, which reinforced. They would say, don't say that. Don't say immigrants are animals. Well, that all it does is reinforce the same imagery. You have to step out of the metaphor itself to be able to present it. So that was the basis of me doing my work that's called Brown Tide Rising.
Thank you, Otto. It's very clear that as an expert in discourse analysis, and one of the very few people and scholars, even today, who look at how discourse analysis affects Latino in these discourses, along with politics, one of the things you've captured is the continuity, meaning that these stereotypes over time, so much so that just recently, you and your students have administered research showing how Trump's language about Latinos, once immigrants are animals, Trump now stating things such as Mexicans are rapists. You've been on the forefront of capturing that. Can you tell us specifically about that project and what were you able to reveal and why it's important?
One of the things I want to underscore is that all my work is done with undergraduate students because it is very labor intensive, and they have to become critical thinkers and critical readers to be able to understand what's being spoken. And I do not make any of the particular analyses. It is students in a consensus to develop this group. I did work, and I was an expert witness in a previous, in 2010, the work that I did was, I was asked by the ACLU and the Latino and MALDEF, pardon, because I was asked by MALDEF and the ACLU to do a study of Arizona's premier legislative racist, Russell Pierce, who had come out with legislation that said that he wanted to rid Arizona of immigrants. That went to court and so forth. The attorneys became aware of this, civil rights attorneys, and when Trump in 2017 said that he was going to eliminate DACA, I got a phone call within a week from Robert Chang, who is an attorney and activist, asking for me to do a declaration for the countersuits to maintain DACA. I enlisted 35 of my students. I had a class of 40. 35 of them worked with me for 4 months intensively, and we analyzed 6,000 of Trump's tweets from the very first day of his statement that he was going to run for president till the day that he said he was going to eliminate DACA. We analyzed 13 speeches, which included the first speech, his inaugural speech, and all the way to the day before he made the announcement that he was eliminating DACA. We found consistent perspectives, which were characterized immigrants as invaders who were going to take over the country. They were an existential threat, and that he was the only hero that could save the day by building a wall, eliminating all those rapists, druggies, drug dealers, and clean up America. This became part of the record that went to the courts, and I was very proud that the students were part of the co-authors of this work. undergraduates who were both DACA and non-DACA students, all allies working very hard to build this case. The analysis is very straightforward because Trump's language is very straightforward. He does not try to hide anything. He is a stone racist in his language. But what the courts what was required of us of the courts was to justify doing a comprehensive study of his language, and so we did that, and we submitted it in December 22nd, 2017. I forced my students to go home because it was almost Christmas, the holidays had begun, and I didn't want their parents to be angry at me. But they were dedicated people to work really, really hard on this. We did the same kind of analysis that I did in Brown Tide Rising with public discourse, very, very rigorous analysis. And all the material is still online. Other analyses can take place to support that. So to look to see if they can counter our analysis.
Thank you, Otto. One other thing that your work does is not just stop at the discourse analysis, but actually provide how these narratives affect politics and policies. And we can see with your research, with your students, this specifically when you were talking with Trump, was actually used in the Supreme Court. And just recently we know that the Supreme Court upheld DACA, again, based on a lot of the research that you're doing. How does that feel? How do you make sense of that? And what do you say to new scholars or graduate students or about, going about doing new research that is really going to have an impact on people's lives?
Well, thank you so much. The actual judgment, the actual decision upheld DACA, but it was not upheld in terms of equal protection clause issues. So the Chief Justice Roberts chose to avoid talking about equal protection of the law, the 14th Amendment and that, which was the basis of our work. In fact, they said that they looked at how Trump had followed administrative law and found that he had violated the law by being very disregarding normal procedures to rescind that program. That's all. Because of that, this is what the week where AMLO is going to meet with Trump. I imagine that Trump is going to reinitiate a rescission of DACA this week. And so it's frustrating, and at the same time, it's very important to recognize that, and I tell my students who become very engaged in this, that what we are doing is laying the groundwork. We cannot expect the Supreme Court or any judicial body to do the work of a democracy. We can only provide our basis and our energies. It takes the motivation of people in the street. It takes legislative action, which has been zero in the last 4 years with regard to liberal measures and issues regarding immigrants. And what that requires is getting people in elected office. So we need people in the streets, we need people to be organizing, we need people to be organizing voter rallies, and we have to move forward to change the democracy, to make it engaged. I'm very grateful and very gratified to hear the energy of the students and the young people in this country today. Because 4 years ago, we didn't hear anything like this. And I've now seen 25 years of this sort of work very seriously, looked at it. We are at a cusp where we can change the public discourse. If we change the public discourse toward immigrants or Latinos or people of color, the nation will move in our direction. In 1994, Celia, it was appropriate. It was okay to call an immigrant an animal. It was perfectly, no one even noticed it. And our energies then, the activists of the day, when I had no gray hair, that was when people were in the streets working very hard to get to motivate and develop a cadre of activist people. And that led to the change. So we no longer talk about, except for Trump and his circle of friends, the general population is abhors the language of Trump regarding people. And I think that's where we need to go. We need to document. We have to teach people how to be cognizant of how powerful public discourse is. And when we change the narrative in the public arenas, we will have change.
We cannot thank you enough, Otto. Clearly, here we're seeing as many people have named you as an activist scholar with scholarship that really transcends and makes change. Thinking about how your work has changed public discourse. We can think about the long fights about calling illegal immigrants rightfully undocumented immigrants, and how that gives people sympathy, empathy for folks to have equal rights. And so again, really attesting to the work that you have done. And you've already talked about how we can continue to combat these racial stereotypes. And you've given us a great blueprint, not only scholarly wise, but as we move into the November presidential election. And we really appreciate that because you've given us really concrete steps. I wanted to end with just providing you an opportunity for any last thoughts or anything that you want to share with us before we go.
You have to realize, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be part of this circle. The work that you're doing as a young scholar moving forward is just such a joy to know. It gives me a lot of satisfaction to know that people are following on what, as I followed my pioneers, and I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity. What we do have to realize, it's very difficult, is when we get slapped, when we get offended by people's language, it is up to us to both reject that discourse in the public, in the private circles, and to provide an alternative. What had not been done in the 90s, until we attacked and critiqued immigrants, the language used by about immigrants, was a status quo. It's very clear today in this period of time with Trump that we have two discourses. A discourse of the past, which is a eugenics, racist perspective on people of color, of women. It's literally a 19th century discourse. It is contested daily by the young people and the activists today. And we must continue to articulate an alternative progressive discourse. If we do that, we will see change, because people are guided by the language, the narratives that are being articulated in our society.
Otto, as you said, you laid out the groundwork, and so many of us, as you've passed on the baton, have completely taken it. Many of your students run to make that change. So we thank you dearly today. We hope you have a wonderful, wonderful summer, and we will be in touch. Again, this is Celia Lacayo with LA Social Science. Please make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much, and thank you, Otto.
Thank you so very much, Celia.